The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to Peter, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. There are many images in the Bible that aren't readily understandable until someone explains them to us. For example, we don't really know what it looked or felt like to have leprosy. We don't think of our faith in terms of mustard seeds. And though some of us have kept livestock, none of us have spent long days in the field as shepherds. But stormy water, that is an image we understand. Like a bridge over troubled water, weathering the storms of life, when it rains, it pours. These are more than just cliches or aphorisms. They're something that describe the difficulties we go through in life. And the frequency with which stormy water appears in our speech and cultural imagination speaks to its resonance with us. But it is not simply as a metaphor that we understand the notion of stormy water. We've seen it in action on rainy days at the Oregon coast. When I read the story of the disciples being battered around on the waves and wind in Matthew 14, I feel a bit sick to my stomach. You see, about 20 years ago, I personally experienced what it was literally like to be on a small boat during a storm. So two of my friends, Mark and Ethan, had just gotten their captain's licenses for sailboats, and they were eager to try it out. They wanted to take a group of us down, rent a boat, and go sailing on the Puget Sound. So a group of us from PLU went down with them and for an evening outing. Now, the fact that the skies were darkening and it was getting pretty chilly should have given the new captains a clue that conditions might not be as ideal as they would imagine. Although I'm not sure it would have mattered. These were the same 21-year-old geniuses that led a group of us up Mount Rainier to go snow camping during a blizzard. But that's a story for another day. On this fateful evening of the first boat ride, we were out in the middle of the Sound when it started to rain. And then the wind really picked up. I was getting nervous, but some of my other friends were on the boat yelling at the storm, "Come get us, waves!" as if they were Captain Dan and Forrest Gump. Suddenly, the boat started listing. Mark and Ethan's faces turned white, and my friends' yelling turned to screaming. I clutched at the railing with all my might, trying not to think of how cold the water was. As I got so close to it, I could have reached down and touched it. I would have given anything for Jesus to come walking by on the water at that moment to save our foolhardy group. We who have endured storms of life, either literally or figuratively, and who have dwelt in the fear that comes in the midst of storms, know what it is like to want to be saved. When we read the familiar story of Jesus walking on the water, we can imagine ourselves in the boat with the disciples, looking to Jesus in desperation. What we don't often do is think of ourselves with Peter, trying to join Jesus in his physics-defying act. That's a part of the story we sometimes skim by, so we get to the part where Jesus saves the day. But think about that. Peter stepped out of the boat. In the middle of the storm, he responded to Jesus saying, "Come." Peter mustered up his courage, got up, and tested out the surface tension of the waves. What must that have been like? I mean, sure, Peter saw Jesus walking on the water, but Peter wasn't God's son. He didn't know if he'd be able to safely join Jesus' miraculous jaunt. But Peter got up and stepped out. We admire that kind of courage, don't we? In fact, we lift up other Christians who have stepped out in faith into storms of various kinds. Dietrich Bonhoeffer felt led by his faith to reveal the horrors of the Nazi regime during World War II. He participated in covert operations, funneling information to foreign governments and setting in motion events that were intended to lead to Hitler's assassination. He showed great bravery. 2 weeks ago, Andrew told us the story of John Lewis, marching across a bridge in Selma, Alabama, toward men and dogs that he knew could attack him. Lewis heard clearly Jesus' call to set the captives free, and he worked for that cause his entire life. Lewis followed in the footsteps of other crusaders for justice, like Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth was entirely motivated in her work by her faith. "I has just one text to preach from," she would say. "My text is, when I found Jesus." Like Peter, these heroes exhibited great bravery in their time, hearing the call of Jesus and taking the risk of following him. We admire them, but we may not imagine that we can emulate them. I have heard many people talking recently about feeling called to do something about the injustices in the world right now, particularly around the environment, immigration, hunger, homelessness, and very present in our minds right now, racism. One of our members recently commented to me that the work I feel called to do is risky right now, but I feel like I need to do it out in the streets with the people calling for racial justice. For many of us, the call of Jesus on our lives is strong, but not nearly so clear. I admit that I am somewhat scared of answering the call, both of rocking the boat by engaging more deeply in the work of our time and by getting out of the boat at all. I mean, there's this new initiative that the Synod is putting together to encourage congregations to look at their role in perpetuating systemic racism. Should we be part of it? What if it doesn't work? There are also questions that have been put in front of our congregation and congregations around the Synod and even the country in terms of how we will actually participate in the work of sanctuary. I wonder if I can help guide us through these conversations, or if the conversation would lead to alienation between members of our community. I feel fear. In such moments of doubt, I have to remember that Peter got out of the boat and then he fell into the water. In other words, his faith failed him. Jesus said to him with compassion and puzzlement, "Why did you doubt, O man of faith, O man of little faith?" Peter was both a brave and faithful follower of Jesus and a man of doubt and fear. Such is our reality, we who are not the Son of God. Bonhoeffer, who was captured and killed by the Nazis for his subversive work, addressed this reality of being both incredibly brave and truly human in a poem he wrote while in prison called "Who Am I?" I want to read it to you. He writes, "Who am I? They often tell me I step from my cells of confinement calmly, cheerfully, firmly, like a squire from his country home. Who am I? They often tell me I used to speak to my warders freely and friendly and clearly, as though it were mine to command. Who am I? They also tell me I bore the days of misfortune equitably, smilingly, proudly, like one accustomed to win. Am I then really that which other men tell of? Or am I only what I myself know of myself, restless and longing and sick, like a bird in a cage, struggling for breath as though hands were compressing my throat, yearning for colors, for flowers, for the voices of birds, thirsting for words of kindness, for neighborliness, tossing in expectations of great events, powerlessly trembling for friends at an infinite distance, weary and empty at praying, at thinking, at making, faint and ready to say farewell to it all. Who am I? This or the other? Am I one person today and tomorrow another? Am I both at once? A hypocrite before others, and before myself a contemptible, woebegone weakling? Or is something within me still like a beaten army, fleeing in disorder from victory already achieved? Who am I? They mock me, these lonely questions of mine. Whoever I am, thou knowest, O God, I am thine. We too are both brave and faithful followers of Jesus, and people full of fear and doubt. And in all our humanness, we are people of God. We are God's own. Next week, we will continue to explore what it could look like to act collectively to respond to the real challenges of our time. But this week, I encourage you to spend some time reflecting individually. What anchors your faith? What call are you hearing from Jesus right now? Are you feeling courageous or full of fear? Or both? And finally, what would it mean for you to step out of the boat and into the storm?